Okay. My name is Cristina Biaggi. This is October 21st, 2007, and we are in Palisades, New York, in USA.
Cristina, could you tell us when you first heard about the peace encampment?
Somewhere in the beginning of the 80s, that's when I first heard about it. And I was very excited because, a whole bunch of women doing something political is always extremely exciting.
And did you end up spending time at the peace camp?
Yes, I came, the first time I came up was with my friend Gail Dunlap, and we joined the women there to climb over the fence, and that's what we did, and then we got arrested right off the bat.
Were you part of an affinity group?
We were part of an affinity group, yes.
And how many people were in your affinity group?
Oh, I don't remember. I really don't remember.
That's okay.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about your impressions when you first got to the camp?
Well, I was overwhelmed by the fact that there were, these women that were doing these very exciting things, resisting. And, I've always liked to resist. And here we are. These women are resisting something that is untoward, the powers that be.
Can you tell us what kinds of things went on at the encampment while you were there?
Well, I remember that people, I don't remember, I remember very much about the actions. That's what I remember. I remember going over the fence. I remember, the policemen arresting me. I remember how they trembled when they would put on the handcuffs. I remember things like that. And I remember in the camp, there was this great camaraderie between the women, this living together, this sharing, which was very, very important. And that's how I met Catherine Allport too, who, I was madly in love with. And she was cooking, and that was lovely. She was cooking for everyone. And so there was these womanly things that were going on, such as cooking and doing so-called traditionally womanly things, and then there was this other force of resistance and climbing over the fence and being active, being proactive, and so on. The more, you might say, the more masculine sensibility aspect of the whole thing, or the more Athena aspect.
That's a nice way to put it.
Athena defending the city, with the olive tree and then the defense.
Right. Did you participate in the events that were happening on the land?
Yes, I don't remember too much of that. But okay, the action that I remember was the very first time that we went over the fence and so on, and then got arrested. And 600 of us were there. I remember it was quite a large number, including, certainly that's when I met Kim. And I remember very well that it took 4 men, because she was passively resisting. It took 4 guards, and she was screaming and so on and so forth. It took 4 guards to drag her off to jail. And I remember that. It was wonderful. It was wonderful. It was very life-affirming.
Did you spend time inside the depot in their
holding cell? Yes. For I think, 5 hours or something like that. We were there chanting and doing various things like that.
Do you remember any of those chants?
Well, I remember we are the round and we are the web, we are the weavers, we are the tide and we are the ebb, we are the weavers, we are the web, that and many others,
Were there skills or activities that you participated in that you hadn't participated in?
Well, certainly climbing over the fence. I had never done that before. I'd never been arrested before. I mean, this was the first of a series of arrests. So, no, and then I ended up, I ended up getting arrested at Comiso too. That's a whole different story.
Had you been you had been politically active before you went to the
Yes, but not as
Encampment.
much. That this really raised my consciousness more, and I became much more politically active after that.
And did you spend a number of different times at the encampment?
I didn't spend as much time certainly as you or as Kim probably, but I spent because I had commitments, I had children, I had dogs and all that. But I spent a few weekends there. I didn't live on the land like many of the women did. Unfortunately, I was not able to do that. I didn't feel I could do that, but I would have, had I not had children or dogs or whatever. But I did come for some weekends or for 5-day periods, and participated in that way.
You made long-term relationships with some women from the encampment?
Yes, I made long-term. Well, I became Catherine Alport and I became lovers, and she's still my very, very good friend. And Gail Dunlap was my friend, and continues to be my friend. And we shared that first action at Seneca that we went to together, and we were just bowled over by it. I remember it was very much like, in some ways, like being in Vassar where I went to Vassar, because when I went to Vassar the first time, I thought to myself, all of these gorgeous, intelligent women, just studying together, discussing things that matter together. Well, this was kind of like that, in a sense, the being with women, and being totally yourself with women. That's what I remember. I don't remember so much the details, but I remember the feelings about that.
So you had lived in women's community to some extent at Vassar.
Oh yes, in Vassar,
And
yes.
Had you experienced other women's community?
No, only at Vassar, at Seneca, at Greenham, and unfortunately at Comiso there was nobody there, so I did the action all by myself, and that was it. And that's another story.
Uh-huh.
Can we hear that story?
That's a long story.
Okay,
We are willing to listen.
Okay. Do you want me to go on to that one, or do you want to go to the Green? Did you get any interviews about Greenham, or?
Oh, yes, and that was my next question for you, was did you have connection with Greenham?
Well, once I knew about Seneca, of course. I mean, Greenham was the next step. And being a person who likes, who doesn't, I don't like to be confined to the United States. I thought, well, England is, I was hearing about how wonderful and how strong the British women were, and the Irish women, and all the women that were resisting in Greenham Common. So I decided that my next step was to go there, and. I heard about this 40,000 women action that was going to take place, I think, on December 11th in 84 or 83, I think. I have it written down in my interview that I wrote. So I went to Greenham, and the night before I went to Greenham, I remember I went to see the opera, because I'm a lover of the opera. I went to see the opera, and I went to see Les Dialogues des Carmélites, which is an opera about nuns in the French Revolution who are resisting, kind of, the French Revolution, in a sense, who are resisting, being treated the way, being told that they can't be nuns, that they can't be in this women's community. And that was extremely inspiring to me, and they end up all dying. They're all guillotined. And that was, I remember seeing the opera and then thinking to myself, I'm going to Greenham Common, and I'm going to, experience this community of women who are resisting against things that are wrong. So I went to Greenham, and sure enough, it was not at all a disappointment. It was absolutely wonderful. I mean, the commitment of the women was beyond compare. Living in these tents along the periphery of the fence, and being the wonderful camaraderie that was between the women. And the buses started coming. The buses started coming, huge, busloads of people and so on and so forth. And there were something like 40,000 women resisting, for this resistance movement. And I set myself up as the photographer, basically. I wasn't going to climb over the fence. I was going to just record everything, that I saw to give the photographs to people and for publication and so on, and also for my own art, because basically in life I'm an artist, and so I get inspired by things that are around me that I feel inspiring. So the action started, and the women started to chant. They started to pull the fence. The bobbies were actually quite respectful. They had been told to be respectful, and they were, on the whole, very, very nice, actually, respectful and so on. They didn't engage in slurs or anything like that. The women started to pull down the fence, and they succeeded in some areas. They succeeded, and they went over to the other side, and of course they'd get arrested. But everything was done in a very respectful way, I thought. There were a couple of incidents where people got hurt, but it wasn't really, really bad. I mean, no one, was beaten up or anything like that. And some people ended up in jail for a while, and then we went to some of the not trials, hearings, yes, and supported them that way. I stayed in England for about a week or 10 days, something like that. But that was an incredible action, that Greenham action. The snow at one point, I remember the second day the snow was falling, and all these tents right outside the fence, that some of which had been taken down by the women, and we were walking around the periphery and seeing the guards on the other side. It was incredible. It was an incredible scene.
Did you know any women from Seneca that were at Greenham at that time, or did you meet Greenham?
Yes, I met some women from Seneca, and I don't remember who they were. And I also met some women from Minnesota, very strong Minnesota contingent, and there were some women from all over. Some from New Zealand, a strong contingent from New Zealand. Some from Australia. I think there's some from Germany. There were women from all over the world, basically. It was a very powerful action. Very, very powerful, very inspiring.
And do you recall when you were at Seneca, were there women there from Greenham or other parts of the world?
Yes, there was. It was Gwen Kirk. Do you remember her? Gwen Kirk? Mm-hmm. Where was she from? Well, she was from Greenham, I think. She was from Greenham. Because eventually, she and somebody else, and I forget who it was, came to Palisades, and we presented, some of the things that we had done at Seneca and at Greenham at Comizot and so on. We presented it here in the church, and an article was written in the Journal News about it, and so on and so forth. I mean, there was a whole concatenation of events that took place after that. As a result of the Seneca things, and as a result of the Greenham things. So I mean, it's a pebble that falls in the water that spreads. And here you are doing it again. Here we are doing it again. It's a continuation of that. And maybe it'll be a revitalization of something that we need right now in this world, because I think that we're all going. I mean, not all of us, but I mean certainly our government has gone to the dark side, and we need to resist that a little more. We haven't resisted it, I don't think. We've all been too involved in our own things, and I'm basically talking about myself, because I can't talk about you certainly, but I can see that that we need to revitalize and re-energize.
When you continued your Seneca journey, you went to Greenham, and then
I decided that I had to go to the Italians, because I'm half Italian myself, Swiss Italian. So I decided that I wanted to check out Comizot, La Ragnatela, the spider web in Comizot, which is now, the Comizot has been totally dismantled, so the base has been dismantled.
Was that an American base? I don't.
It's an American base in Sicily.
Thank you.
And what happened there was, I had made contact with some Comiso women, and I was going to meet them at the base. And this was in January of '84. You know, I'm very good with dates anyhow. And I had planned to meet them. I went to Sicily. I did some touring. You know, I did some touring around by myself. I went to things that I like to do. Visited megalithic monuments. Did some art touring and so on and so forth. And then I planned to meet these women at a certain time in Comiso. Well, when I got there, there were no women. There were no women. And the reason was that some of them had become sick because of the hygienic conditions there or something like that, and they had to go to the hospital. So nobody was there to meet me. And I was very frustrated. This was about 10 o'clock in the morning or 11 o'clock in the morning. And so I decided, well, I would go around the base. I would tour around the base with my car. I'd rented a car. And then I thought, well, why don't I take some photographs? You know, at least that. So, and I saw very clearly, I have to admit, I saw very clearly. Le fotografie sono diviete. You know, you can't photograph. There was a sign. I said, I don't like that. And I started taking pictures. In fact, I got on top of my car and I started taking pictures. In fact, I went up to, you know, I was feeling in a combative mood. So there was a little cabin there, a little hut, you know, basically, where the women had done the kitchen and so on and so forth. That was the center of the ragnatela, and it said there, ragnatela. So I climbed up to the roof and started taking, you know, really panoramic shots of the base and all that. Well, suddenly I hear two police cars from two different directions come charging in. Six policemen leap out, or there were 8, I don't remember, and with submachine guns, and they trained them on me, and they say, "Cosa fa lei lì?" You know, and I say, "Ma io sto prendendo delle foto, I'm taking pictures." He said, "Don't you know that it's forbidden to take pictures?" And I said, "I didn't see any sign." No. He said, "Lei venga giù subito, come down immediately." So I did. And I was trembling, but I was trying to, you know, act as if, who are you? You know, that kind of thing. So they arrested me right then and there. They said, "Signor, you have to come with us. You did something very illegal and so on and so forth. We're arresting you." So they take me to the station, and they tell me that I have one telephone call that I can make, and of course I made it to. You know, I wasn't going to call one of the women because, you know, I think I tried to call one of the women and there was an answering machine. So I said, I couldn't reach anyone. Can I make another call? So I called a friend of mine in Italy, in Genova. I was in Sicily, in Genova, in the north. And I told her that, you know, I told her that I was being arrested, and very briefly, and why. Well, because of my call, she, of course, alerted my mother and my family and so on and so forth. And the next thing I know, you know, from the outside, the next thing I know is that I made the papers in Lausanne, I made the papers in Italy, I made all these papers because everybody was kind of claiming me for their own. I mean, I didn't make the American papers, but I made the Lausanne papers, I made the Geneva papers, I made the Genova papers, and so on and so forth. They said, you know, the pacifist has been, the first pacifist of the year has been arrested in Comiso. Okay, all right. In the meantime, I am in the police station, and the police, this very kind of handsome policeman who was very, you know, very debonair and all that. He said, "Signora, we have to take you to jail." I said, "Okay, fine." And after I'd made my call, and then on the way, he tries to pick me up. In a sense, he says, "Signora, you're a pacifist. I really respect that. But when your jail sentence is over, would you like to? I'm really a great admirer of art. Would you like to come and see, my art collection? So I said, sure. And then on the way, when he takes me to the jail, and it's this 15th century dungeon. I mean, it's this huge castle. The walls are 12 feet thick. You enter, and then there's this clanging gate. The gate clanged shut after we entered, like this. You felt you were entombed. And as we entered, he started to quote Dante. He was a very kind of a passionate person. So he started to quote the first 4 lines of the Divine Comedy. Nel mezzo del camino, and he practically had me in tears because he had a beautiful voice, and he said, I leave you here and I'll see you again, that kind of thing. So
The opera, huh?
very operatic. So here I am, I'm fingerprinted, I'm booked, and so on and so forth, and I'm put in this solitary confinement cell, which is perfectly normal, small cell with a bed and a basement and all that. And of course, you're in solitary confinement in Sicily is not solitary confinement in the United States, because people started coming and talking to me, and then every once in a while the guards say, no, she's in solitary confinement, leave her alone. So I would stop, they would stop talking to me. But there were 7 other women in this jail, this women's jail, and 2 of them had killed their husbands, and you can really understand why if you travel around in Sicily, because the men are very, very patriarchal. You can really, and one of them had become this. She was about 72 years old, and she'd become this model prisoner, and she took care of everybody else. She'd become the mama of the prison. She also kept the prison completely clean, and it was spotless. It was wonderful. She'd bring me, my food for the day, which was bread, cheese, a little bit of wine. We had wine in the Sicilian jail. We did have wine. And then meat, and then, actually we were quite well fed. Toilet paper, the necessities of life. And then I had my little exercise for 1 hour a day and so on. But I had, basically nothing to do. Thank heavens they let me keep some books, so I read. I read about 3 books, the first day or 2 days. I was there about 4 days. And, but I had a great time. In some ways, I had a very unforgettable time in this jail, because most of the people there, they had killed their husband. 2 had killed their husbands. One was she was a young woman. She was about 24, and she she was an expert at stealing from the post office. She was a person of great conviction, but she had just carried it a little bit too far. And she really admired the fact that I was a peace activist and so on. And she said that she would become a peace activist herself, and and she had all this collection of books about how people were treated in jail in different parts of the world. So when at one point I ran out of books to read, and I said, Patrizia, do you have any books that I could borrow? She gave me a book about torture in Chinese, in Chinese prisons. I said, well, do you have anything lighter than that? Because here we are. And then she said, how I spent 10 years in jail in Vietnam, or something like that. Anyhow, and then there was another woman who also had killed her husband, but she, instead of reacting like the first one, who had become this model prisoner and who was going to actually be released in a year's time, she had turned to Jesus. So she was totally, I asked her, why did you kill your husband at one point? And she said, she started quoting the Bible to me, so I didn't pursue that. And then there was also the priest who came and spoke with me and said, I really admire the fact that you're a pacifist, and come to our service on Sunday and tell your story. And so I did. And I mean, there were all these wonderful moments in the jail, and the guards were very nice to me. And then finally what happened is, on the outside, my friends and family had finally gotten me a lawyer, and the lawyer helped to spring me out. If not, I would have stayed there for 10 days. And then I was told that I had to leave Italy within a 3-day period. So what happened on the 4th day, and I didn't know anything like this was happening. I didn't know how long I was going to be in there for, and it was kind of, you know, quite scary, because some people had been there for years. So I had no idea when I was going to be sprung. But finally, the 4th day, these guards come in, and the guard comes in to the prison, and he has a staff, and he beats on the staff and he said, "La prigioniera Biaggi è liberata," you know, just like straight out of opera. The prisoner Biaggi is liberated, and everybody cheered. And so I said, we hugged and kissed, and everybody, the guards, the inmates, everybody kissed and hugged, and then I left. And then I was free, and they were not, you know, and I felt very badly. So what happened was, well, I immediately, you know, took my car and went to the volcano Etna, you know, and went as far as I could to see the lava, and that was kind of purifying, you know, from that experience. And then afterwards I went to Switzerland, and I went to ski in my privileged condition, you know. And I bought some Swiss chocolate, and I sent a box of Swiss chocolate to all the inmates and to all the guards and to the priest. And I don't know if they ever got this, you know, but anyhow, that was my story. Call me so.
What happened to the film?
The film, it was you know, taken by the police, because I'd taken a lot of pictures. I also took a lot of pictures of things that I was also interested in, like megalithic monuments in Sicily, you know, that I was writing my first book about that, and the great goddess and so on and so forth. All that was taken, you know. And I never saw, what's his name, Dario, the policeman. I did not pursue that.
Did this experience ever make its way into your art or literary work?
Well, I wrote, one of my articles is about that, you know, and it's as vivid now as it was then, you know, every detail. Mm-hmm. Even the fact that the guards would come in every single day and announce what they were doing. They said, "Il sbarramento delle barre," you know, and we have to see if the bars are all intact, if nobody's been sawing them at night. And so they would go, I mean, all of this was done in such an operatic way. They would take their batons and run them over the bars. And if they made a strange sound, then they knew something, you know, had been, and everybody had to clear out and look on. I mean, it was, you know, everything was so operatic and so, in some ways, wonderful. This patriarchy was operatic. Did that take a little
edge off the terror of it all?
Well, in retrospect. Well, no, actually, during the time, it did, because that was so ludicrous, you know. I mean, the whole some of it was very, very ludicrous. The human aspect was so wonderful, though. I mean, talking to the guards, talking to the priest. You know, the guards were supposed to be the patriarchal purveyors and so on the other side. But they were just, you know, they were admiring of the peace movement. You know, they were doing their job, but they also admired what we were doing, you know, in a larger sense, and that was very heartening.
Take a break while she switches heats.
Just a little one here.
Was there a particular reason that you chose not to get arrested at Greenham?
Because I was taking photographs, and also I didn't want to stay in jail too long. I didn't know how long, you know, because some people stayed in jail for 10 days and so on.
And when you came,
and I had to, I had kids in college and so on, and you know, I didn't know whether I should do that or not, you know. But when you have children, you have to think of them also.
When you were standing on the car in Italy, though, were you willing to take the risk of a prison sentence? I wasn't thinking. I was not thinking about the fact that maybe I would be arrested. I really wasn't. I was just taking my chances. I was plowing. You know, I was carrying on. That's what I was doing.
And at Greenham, it was a little bit, to be honest, it was very overwhelming to see these 40,000 women. It was very, very exciting but overwhelming. And I thought, my God, I just decided, I said, no, I'm going to take pictures. I'm not going to actually, go over the fence.
You've done a lot of writing about these experiences?
I've done some writing, as you'll see,
And artwork?
And artwork. I've done a lot of artwork about, most of my artwork is, a continuation of that, For instance, when I went to Nairobi to the women's conference, that's a continuation of that. The Nairobi Women's Conference, the Beijing Women's Conference, and I only learned about the women's conferences. There was one in Copenhagen and one in Mexico, I think. Mexico, Copenhagen, Nairobi, and Beijing, 4 of them. And I went to 2 of them. And that was marvelous. That was wonderful.
Tell us about that.
Well, the Nairobi one was obviously Nairobi, and there were women from all over Africa. Basically, if you looked at the faces, the sea of faces, most of them were black, which was great, and there were a lot of women from South Africa who came, and discussed their plights, as in the land of apartheid. And in fact, I eventually went to South Africa with Catherine Alford. I met her there, and we went to some of the hot spots, the so-called hot spots, in South Africa, where the blacks were confined, where they were allowed to live, and so on. And then we also went to Soweto, which is a suburb. At this point, it's a suburb of Johannesburg, and it's been I haven't gone to it since, but then that's where the blacks lived. And then you'd see these long lines of, I'm sure you've heard of this, these long lines of black people at the end of the day who'd come and work in Johannesburg, going back on buses to Soweto. Huge long lines, masses of people getting on the buses to go back to the places where they lived.
So at the conference, women spoke about the plight that they were in.
Yes. And some of them took their chances. Were most of them from South Africa. Most of the women from South Africa were activists who had been to jail, and who had not been tortured, but who had spent a considerable amount of time in jail, and who were constantly being threatened by the government. And in fact, when I went to South Africa, we had dinner with some whites and blacks who had been to jail and who had spent a lot of time in jail and so forth. And Catherine and I were very, very inspired by the whole thing. And we did some writing on that. Too.
Is that when you met Helen Joseph?
That's right. Yeah.
Why do you describe that time as a continuation of the peace encampments?
Because it comes from the same place in your heart and soul. It's saying this is not right. We want to do something about it. But it's also this community of women, basically. This community of women who decides to together try to do something about the status quo, try to change the status quo, I think, and also enjoying each other's company in the meantime.
Can you tell us about Beijing, how that was different from
Nairobi? Well, it was much vaster, and it was also not in Beijing, and it was in Wairo, so we felt as if we were kind of sequestered from the main action, because of the powers that be. And I saw some very interesting things there, real patriarchal things. For instance, I attended one of the wonderful things about Beijing was this wonderful lesbian march, which the powers that be wanted to stop, but they couldn't, because there were too many of us. So they kind of looked on from the sides, And you know, a lot of those women in my sphere that I did of Beijing were, you know, strong lesbians from the United States, but from all over. It was wonderful to see women from Sri Lanka or India or Pakistan and places like that who had never been able to really express their feelings, and suddenly they were expressing their feelings. They were weeping, and they were walking, they were marching, and they were, you know, singing, and they were you know, they were being themselves. Finally, for the first time, they were able to be themselves, and it was great.
I want to remind you too that I don't know if you remember, but there was a move to bring women from Seneca over to Greenham, and I remember you as being instrumental in arranging. We had a dinner party or something went on in New York City, and women had pitched in money to send some of the organizers from Seneca over to Greenham, and I remember you being at that.
Maybe I was, yeah.
Catherine was there.
Yes, I think I was.
But it was very moving to me, and I wasn't going to go because I thought, no, I need to stay at the camp. I had just gotten out of jail, and I was like, no, I'm not going to go. And I remember you saying to me, why on earth wouldn't you go? And I was like,
oh, that 40,000 women thing was just so inspiring. Kim, I wish you'd come. Anyhow,
well, I was there later. You know, thanks to your efforts and some of the other women in New York City, they sent
really
seven of us. I think they sent over to Greenham. And
right, I remember that.
For 2 years.
I remember that, yeah. And Gwen Kirk was instrumental. Actually, she was instrumental in the whole thing too.
So I really appreciated that you know the women of New York, and that you know helped get some of us over there that otherwise wouldn't have had a chance to be over there.
Right. Well, women who have means should do that. Period. And you know, I think I helped a couple of women go to Beijing or Nairobi. I forget which, but you know, so that they could be there. So that
Makeup, hair.
Here.
Okay, we're good.
Why is it?
You did a little thing, so it.
You know, there's, I don't know if you can speak to this, but when Seneca started, computers were not part of the scene. Now, I heard things that about Beijing, when things started to go bad or get dangerous, that women had computers and were able to get messages back stateside and get politicians involved in making calls, and that some safety for women was enacted because of that. Are you aware of any of that?
I don't remember that. No, I don't remember that because you know, I have a computer and I do, you know, email and all that, but I'm not really friends with computers. You know, so.
Okay, well, can you tell us more about Beijing?
Well, one of the, Catherine, because I was there with Catherine Allport, and we had a great time. We bought 2 bicycles, and so we went around, you know, with our bicycles, and we went to these events. We went to one event, the Palestinian women, which was very, very moving. What happened to the Palestinian women, you know, as a result of the Israelis, you know, coming into their camp and killing some of them, and so on and so forth. And we heard all of the testimony of that. That was incredible. That was incredible. And things like that. We went to a lot of, you know, there were a lot of events. There were something like 1,500 events. Some you know, that were all taking place within a 2-week period. And of course, there were women from all over the world.
And what did you do with all this information? You know, you've got Nairobi, Beijing.
I did a lot of talks. I did some artwork, but basically talks, articles, artwork, and things like that.
Can you describe the art piece you did with the web that you showed us the picture of?
Okay. It's basically, because I'm also very involved with women's spirituality, of course, not only the politics but also the spiritual aspect. So I'm involved with numbers, and there are 3 layers here. There's the center portion is basically the great goddess, and actually this is Catherine Allport. You know. And then there are the number 3 and the number 7. So there are 7 panels around here. These are all the movements, you know, basically the anti-slavery movements and so on, and the suffragette movements in the first tier, in the first circle here, beyond, you know, the middle. And then this on the outside are all the recent movements, including Seneca, including Greenham, including, you know, various movements in Europe and all over the world at that point, at that time, you know, in the 80s, in the 70s, and so on and so forth. And the other side, it's a double-sided collage, is basically the same thing. Here's a black woman who's also, and I used a woman that somebody knew, you know, and I paid her to model for me, and she modeled for me. And these are, I made a collage out of, you know, on wood with photographs and you know, images from newspapers, magazines, and you know, regular images and images that I'd taken, and then I transferred it to cloth. And the cloth is attached by means of red rope, and it's very hard to see the red rope here because these pictures are a little faded, but I mean, they're all attached with red ropes, and the red symbolizes basically our menstrual blood that connects us all, you know. And so the very fact that this is made out of cloth, so the wind can shift it like this, like a flag. So it's actually quite an effective piece, I think.
When did you begin your work in you know, for lack of a better term, goddess studies?
Oh my gosh. Beginning of the 80s. Beginning of the 80s, end of the 70s, beginning of the 80s.
And how did your experiences at Seneca and the other peace camps and the other women's gatherings, women's community, how did that affect you, your spirituality, and your work?
Well, you know, the political became sort of merged with the spiritual at that point. Because also what was happening at that point, in the middle 70s, Maria Gimbutas came out with her book about gods and goddesses of all Europe, which later became Goddesses and Gods of All Europe. She came out with that book, and that book was a huge affirmation for women, you know, as being in the center of life way back in the Neolithic, as opposed to peripherally the way it is under patriarchy. So that was very important. That was a very important piece. And then, you know, she became very important to the goddess spirit, to the women's spirituality movement and the women's political movement. Because I don't think you can really separate them. I think, you know, each person has these two aspects to them, whether one is more developed than the other. But I mean, we all have that. So, and I see it as being intertwined. And I think that all of these, the Seneca and Greenham, helped me to intertwine all of the parts, the women's spirituality, the goddess, and so on, because there is going to the goddess. There's as you know, there's very, very strong evidence that our first numinous power, or, you know, sacred power, was a female. We worshipped a female before we worshipped, you know, this bearded person up there, and the women and the goddess spirituality is much more egalitarian, much more inclusive, and less, you know, dualistic, the way the patriarchal God is, and so on, and so it's much more harmonious to the soul.
And I would like you to also talk about your book, The Habitations of the Great Goddess, because, you know, these are, it seems, you know, just from hearing your chronology, that these experiences at the Peace Camp and Greenham, and then with the women's conferences, that it really kind of
sparked,
you know, exploded you out into the goddess scene, and you have that wonderful book, The Habitations of the Great Goddess. And
The Habitations of the Great Goddess came as a result. I did my PhD on the goddess, basically. Let's see. my PhD dissertation, which was 650 pages long, which I also finished in the very early 80s. You know, in 83 I got my PhD. So this was all happening at once. I got my PhD in megalithic monument that symbolized the great goddess, which later became the book Habitations of the Goddess, which was basically about which was basically about temples, tombs, and habitations in Malta. And Malta is really a goddess center. I mean, all the temples there, 33 temples there, and they're all very organic, you know, and there are no straight lines. There are like caves. You enter into these incredible places, you know, huge blocks of stone, you know, cupolas and so on. That's the shape of them. They're shaped like the human body. They're shaped like the women's body, you know, curves. And so I wrote about that. And then I went to Scotland because I read an article about an interesting connection between some of the Scottish temples, you know, way back. We're talking about the Neolithic, which is in Scotland. It was different from Malta. It was a little bit later. And there was some connection between the Scottish temples and tombs and so on. And I went to see this, to, you know, ascertain this. And in fact, I, you know, discovered that there was a connection. So I wrote about the ones in Malta and the ones in Scotland, basing all of my research on the goddess, because I believe that's the motivating force for these structures. So that was my first book, but it was based on part of my dissertation. The first part being, you know, a compilation of all the work that people have done on the goddess and evidence of why the goddess was the goddess and why was she the motivating force of early people and so forth.
And now I'd like you to bring us to your current book, The Rule of Mars.
Okay, well, the second book, I want to just
tell you about. Sorry.
The second book is called In the Footsteps of the Goddess. And that's a small little book. It's very accessible, and it's basically how women, and I also included men, because I think that they should be included too, because if not, change will not really take place the way it should. Women and men have come upon the goddess and how they've experienced the goddess. But I have 63 contributors, only 5 of which are men. But the men were very, very, all the men that I interviewed just went on and on and on and on and on and on, because once they get it, they just go on and on and on and on, you know. You know, they get it on one level, and they also say that, you know, they also tell you as a woman that they've gotten it, and they've gotten it, and they've gotten it, and they've gotten it, you know, that kind of thing. So that was, these were just reflections on, getting it in a spiritual sense. And the third book, which is called The Rule of Mars, is basically, it was started, the idea was started at a conference I went to, which was, a conference, an archaeomythology conference, which was inspired by the work of Biaggi. And this conference was about why did the Black Sea flood? When did the Black Sea flood take place, and how did it affect the goddess-centered communities in around the Black Sea and around the Caspian region and in Europe, way back in the Neolithic? And this conference took place in Italy, and I wrote a paper called "Why Did the Kurgans Become Warlike?" And based on this paper, and the Kurgans were the people that apparently, according to Biaggi, came from the steppes, because the steppes had become to be desertified, the desert. And the Kurgans came in at first, in trickles. There were people living around the Black Sea that were living in an egalitarian, according to Biaggi, were living in an egalitarian state, with the women being very important in the society and so on and so forth. And I really believe that there's a lot of evidence for that. Okay, and at one point things changed. And then the result of that was patriarchy eventually. because these Kurgans, for one reason or another, and I go into it in detail in the article and in the book, these Kurgans had become patriarchal, and so they clashed with the mother-centered people of so-called old Europe, and then everything changed over the course of a millennium or two. But things changed, and then they weren't the same after that. So basically, the book, The Rule of Mars, is the whys and wherefore of patriarchy, why and how it's affected us, on this earth, and what to do about it. The last part is what to do about it, suggestions of what to do about it. And in the last part, I included Rianne Eisler, who wrote The Chalice and the Blade, and she wrote a very wonderful article about it, and Mary Clark, who is a social an ecological social scientist, and Imogene Drummond, who is an artist and who's also a very deep thinker in terms of what can we do about the status quo. So it's not only a very negative book, but it's also positive, because it looks at these various aspects. And I think all of this is the more I think of it, is derived from the peace camp in some ways. This is the result of the peace camp, and that feeling between women, and that feeling of not allowing the status quo to continue unremarked, and to look at it. I think this is all part of it.
Do you remember the chant, "We all come from the goddess"?
We all come from the goddess, and to her we shall return like a drop of rain. Coming from the ocean, we all come from the goddess, and to her we will return like a drop of rain. Coming from the ocean.
Did you participate in any rituals at the peace camp?
Oh yeah.
Do you remember any of those?
Vaguely.
And I'm assuming you've participated in rituals since.
Oh yes.
Was there any kind of sense that they were like, rituals that were growing, or since you have this perspective of time over these rituals, was it like we were experimenting at the camp and got better over time, or was there any kind of progression in?
Well, I see, because it all started with the camps, I think, didn't it? I mean, this new wave of feminism started with the camps, and I'm digressing, but I went to Poland when did I go to Poland? Last November. I went to Poland, and as you know, Poland was under the Soviet regime until until 10 years ago or whatever, and now they're doing the same thing that we were doing at the camps. We sang "We All Come from the Goddess" in Polish and in English. I went there as a guest, they wanted me to come, and they wanted me to tell my story and basically to speak about the goddess. I wanted to speak about patriarchy, but they said, no, we've had enough of that. We want you to speak about the goddess. We want to go back to the roots. We also want you to speak about the camp, the Seneca and so on and so forth. So I spoke about the goddess, and I spoke about the camps, and and how that's inspired the whole thing. And then we had a lot of rituals, and we had the same kind of rituals that we had in Seneca, except in Polish, which was great. So I think this whole spirit is slowly, well, from our perspective, it's so, but I mean, it's being, it's filtering out to the rest of the world.
Unifying women internationally.
Yeah. Because there's a group in Turkey, I know, and now there's this very strong group in Poland. There's certainly a group in Switzerland. There's a group in Germany. I'm in touch with some of these people.
So you deal with really lengthy history in some of your work. Can you speak a little bit as a Herstory project, why women's stories of resistance would be important?
To record, to preserve.
Because we're still living, in a very unequal world. We're living in patriarchy. We have to try to change that. We have to try to find an alternative way to do this. We have to do that. We have to keep on doing. We can't just stop, because at this point it's too. I mean, in some ways, one of the conclusions I came to in my book is, or some of the conclusions, not only me, but I mean other people in the book, is that in some ways patriarchy is worse than it's ever been before. But in some ways the resistance, the underlying, the substratum of resistance is there. It's got to be tapped more. And like you're beginning to do that, and so on. And it has to rise more to the surface. We're making more connections with the rest of the world, with the women, and the internet is helping, with that. It's very important to do this. It's extremely important to have these kinds of recordings. It's very, very important. So you're I really applaud you for doing that. And if I can help you in any way, I will. As soon as the boys go off to college, maybe I'll have a party. But